Hi. Good evening. Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Rachel Dry, and I'm the editor of the Sunday Review section here at the Times. Thanks. Oh, that's very kind of you. That's so nice. Sometimes when I tell people that's what I do, they say, "That's a big job," and I say, "I'm a big lady," because I think it's important to let people know when something isn't a compliment. As part of this work, one of my favorite things that I get to do is I get to edit Michelle Goldberg twice a week, and I get to edit Ross Douthat and David Leonhardt when they let me. So it sort of is my job to argue with the host of the argument on a regular basis, except when you're editing a New York Times columnist, the way you argue is you say, "That is so well put, but is that exactly the way you wanted to say it?" And that's how you argue. So I just wanted a quick show of hands. Does everyone know that we are here tonight for a live podcast recording? Yeah, great, good. Okay, so if you didn't raise your hand and didn't realize there was a pop quiz portion of this pre-show entertainment, Ross, Michelle, and David have a podcast called The Argument. It comes out every Thursday. It's must listen. And tonight we're doing they're recording live. Everything that happens after I leave the stage, well, most everything will be available to download. I believe next week as a bonus episode, so you're getting an insider's view into this particular sausage. I don't know that I should have called it sausage, but that's what it is. This is the sixth live opinion event we've done since last September. We're trying to do more of this to bring you the chance to hear from the people who write for us live and in person. We think sometimes it can be more fun to have this experience than just scrolling through the phone or reading the paper. I'm particularly delighted that you bought tickets to something called The Argument, because I do happen to believe that arguing is like the best form of entertainment. That's how I was raised. I was raised in an arguing household, which I had occasion to remember recently. I was on vacation with my parents, and my mother was driving, and my father was navigating, and he decided to turn off the functional GPS because he wanted to get a feel for the roads using the rental car map. Instant argument. But they did teach me, to really have the convictions of what I said and to believe in the power of persuasion. And the clearest lesson for me there, something I carry with me, was in 8th grade. I grew up in a small town in Vermont, and we were studying the American founding. One of the things we did was reenact a sort of pre-continental Congress, just like a fun meeting to decide what should happen with the colonies. What did we, the 12-year-olds of the mid-'90s or the early '90s, think about King George? And I got really into it. We dressed up. We went to a church, so it looked sort of 18th century, I guess. And I marshaled my evidence, and I made my points. And I really cried real tears when they decided to revolt. They didn't vote with me, and I thought they might. I thought I might have had them, because that's what I was taught about the power of an argument. I wanted to give you a little bit behind-the-scenes info on the podcast here tonight, since you are here for the live taping. We didn't know when we started making it that it was going to be called The Argument. There were a couple of different options. We thought we might do something jokey, like No Hard Feelings, or The Exchange, or The Point, or Sure, I'll concede the point, but we both know I'm right anyway, which I guess is sort of the implicit subtitle. It's our great pleasure to have you here tonight. I hope you enjoy the discussion. I hope you enjoy the chance to see it take place live in person in this room tonight. And I hope you'll stay in touch and hear about future Opinion Live events, because we're hoping to do them on a regular basis. So now it is my great pleasure to introduce the hosts of The Argument. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Michelle Goldberg, Ross Douthat, and David Leonhardt.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate it. We're excited to put on a live show for you tonight. And then once we're done with that, we're going to hear from you and interact with you. We've got a little game as well. So this won't just be an episode. It'll also be something we could not do when we're all sitting in a studio all by ourselves. So.
Okay. So for those of you who don't listen to the podcast, this is how we start it. I'm Michelle Goldberg.
I'm Ross Douthat.
I'm David Leonhardt. And this is The Argument, live. Woo! This week, how much immigration is too much? Then, the stealthier Democratic candidates. Which one is the best one? If we were in the studio, I would say, that was terrible, I'll do it again. Then, the stealthier Democratic contenders. Which one is the best one? Okay, once more. This week, how much immigration is too much? Then, the stealthier Democratic candidates. Which one is the best one? And finally, a game. Michelle gets to play referee while Ross and I do battle. Let's start with segment A. President Trump's obsession with immigration has reached a new stage. He is threatening to shut down the Mexican border, and his Secretary of Homeland Security, Kirsten Nielsen, resigned this week. It doesn't seem to have been totally voluntary. Let's start with Nielsen and then move to the broader questions about immigration policy. Michelle, you wrote a much-discussed column this week arguing that she deserves to be ostracized, boycotted by the universities and corporations.
Thank you.
Something tells me
That's all your immediate family, though. So
something tells me a live show is going to play to Michelle's advantage here. Boycotted by the universities, corporations, and the other places that typically give cushy jobs to former cabinet officials. Michelle, make the case.
You know, I actually don't even know that you have, to me the case is so self-evident, right? She oversaw something that was truly evil and despicable and unforgivable. And the argument that she and her allies have now been floating out there is that, well, she tried to restrain him. You know, it could have been even worse. And, you know, something that some of us have heard before, she was just following orders. And so my case is that, first of all, she's responsible for this policy. She carried it out, whatever personal qualms she might have had. She then lied about it before Congress. Or, you know, if I was writing this in my column, I would say she seems to have lied about it before Congress. And I think it's important that there be repercussions for a couple of different reasons. I mean, one, just because there is, you know, our government has been so hijacked and it's getting worse and worse and worse. We just had a purge in DHS. We have, you know, this new attorney general who is kind of completely enthralled to Trump and in no way even pretends to represent the best interests of the country as a whole. So any sort of accountability in the government has been really circumscribed, although you still have attempts at congressional hearings. But we have this asymmetry in American life where the small states that tend to be more rural have disproportionate political power. You know, it's why you have a minority president like Donald Trump in the first place. It's why you can get someone like Brett Kavanaugh confirmed with, you know, 50 or 60 senators that are elected by like 20 or 30% of the electorate, right? But
that might be like a slight exaggeration.
I don't think it is. We'll get the math later. But the flip side of that is that, you know, you people and people on the coasts have disproportionate economic and cultural power, right? That, you know, the coasts, big businesses want to, you know, politicians want to appeal to swing voters in Wisconsin. Big businesses want to appeal to affluent liberals in New York and California and major cities. And so one very imperfect mechanism of accountability in a sort of frayed and fracturing society is through this kind of ridiculous phenomenon of woke capitalism. And so people have the power. They don't have the power to vote out this ghastly government, but they do have the power to boycott companies that do business with its most sort of egregious and lawless members. And I think that it's important that she be made an example of in particular. I mean, again, both because of just the utter cruelty of what they've done and the kind of lives they've blighted in ways that are never going to be repaired, but also because they're gearing up to do it again. Right? So you have now Trump is saying he wants to bring back family separations. He wants to expand it to populations that had not been subject to this policy before. You've had this purge with the idea of putting in, new people who will be even more amenable to committing atrocities. And so if they're not going to be constrained by, decency or the law, perhaps some of them will be slightly constrained by self-interest if they know that when they're done with this, it's going to be all downhill for them.
So let's come up with a little hypothetical here. A school, we'll call it the Kennedy School, at Harvard University, signs up Kirsten Nielsen as a future fellow. Ross, are you signing up for Michelle's boycott, and are you refusing ever to set foot?
I'll speak anywhere. I mean, if they invite me, it doesn't matter. I'll go anywhere. So in that sense, I'm not signing up. But I don't have a really intense. I have some intense feelings about woke capital and the idea that it would be really good for liberalism to just lean into its cultural control.
I don't necessarily think it's really good. I think it's just like kind of an emergency measure.
Yeah. Well, I think on this we basically agree. I think that child separation policy was the worst thing that the Trump administration has done. I think Nielsen should have resigned rather than carry it out, and so I don't have a problem with her bearing some sort of stigma going forward. I think, though, that there's, my general question back to you or both of you is sort of how far this extends, right? Because during the period immediately after or around the controversy about child separation, there was sort of a wave of coverage of bad things that had happened on the border, photos of kids behind cages, stories about kids getting lost in the system after they'd been farmed out to foster families or secondary family members. And there were a bunch of stories that sort of percolated on Twitter for a while and then had to be sort of amended that were about, look at this horrible thing the Trump administration is doing. Oh, wait, the policy actually started under Obama. And that wasn't true of the specifics of child separation, and in that sense, I agree. It was a particular step that deserves a particular response. But there is a larger issue here, which is what we're dealing with generally at the border right now, which is that Trump is flailing around trying to find a policy to deal with the crisis, failing to find a policy, sort of falling back on these ideas of toughness that don't really work. But at the same time, it's a genuinely hard problem that governments, both not only the Obama White House, but governments in Europe, including liberal-run governments, have struggled with consistently over the last 5 or 10 years. What do you do when you get this kind of, what we're seeing right now, this kind of migration cascade? And there are things that a liberal government could do that I think a lot of people on the left would consider beyond the pale. And I mean, is there a stigma that you would attach to anyone who worked for the Obama DHS, I guess?
Well, part of it is that the Obama DHS, there was the Obama DHS, even when there were kind of some egregious cases, there wasn't a carefully wrought policy of inflicting cruelty as a means of deterrence, right? So the Obama DHS, and I would say, deserves condemnation for trying to, there's something called the Flores settlement, which basically says that you can't hold children, you can't hold families in prison for more than, or families
you can't hold their kids
in detention.
Right.
You can't hold kids in detention for more than 20 days. And so the Obama administration had tried to challenge that or renegotiate it so that they could hold these families longer rather than sort of releasing them pending their asylum hearings. And, that was really bad. It was not comparable to what Trump did. And part of what I think gets conflated here is that the Obama administration had to deal with this big influx of unaccompanied minors, right? So they weren't kind of people that they weren't kids that they were ripping from their parents. They were, older teenagers who were coming into the country by themselves. And when you talk about kids who they lost track of, that's who you're talking about. And I remember there was a lot of immigration advocates who got really worried when this story about they've lost track of these kids, when that story really got legs, because they were saying, no, we don't want immigration keeping really close tabs on these kids, right? These kids, they went to, either foster families or relatives or whatever, and we haven't been following them closely, but that's different than kind of losing a 5-year-old in the system so that their parents are never gonna see them again. So we can talk and we will talk about, the sort of genuine ethical dilemmas that this situation brings. And I think there's a lot to condemn about the Obama policy, which partly was about kind of dealing with this crisis and was also, I think, as a lot of the biggest mistakes that Obama made, was based on a false understanding of Republicans, right? That if we show that we can get really tough on undocumented immigrants, then we might get the Republicans to come around to some kind of compromise on the issues that we care about, the Dreamers and other sorts of things. And that obviously was not the case, and hopefully no Democrat should make that mistake again. But the idea, but there is just such a profound qualitative difference between things that the Obama administration did that should be condemned and this truly evil policy.
I agree there's a qualitative difference. I mean, to me, what the Trump administration is doing on immigration is evil. What the Obama administration did was imperfect, and I'm very comfortable drawing the line between evil and imperfect. I don't see that as a quandary. You seem to think, Ross, that there is some quandary there.
I mean, I see a certain amount of rhetoric, and again, not particularly from you guys, but from people left of center about, for instance, that like, if you suspended Flores, right, this decree that says you have to release children, you suspended it, and you then, when families apply for asylum, you keep them in detention, until the asylum application is processed, which under current circumstances takes a very long time. That's getting described as building concentration camps along the U.S.-Mexico border, right?
Well,
the rhetoric doesn't just attach to, I mean, basically Trump has done some particularly awful and some particularly stupid things. He's also tried to do basically a lot of the same stuff that Obama tried to do, and some of that gets described in apocalyptic Hitlerian rhetoric right now.
Well, the reason it gets described that way is because Trump uses apocalyptic Hitlerian rhetoric, right? So you obviously should have a greater degree of scrutiny to a sort of, when a racist madman uses genocidal language about migrants, you should kind of pay more attention than, like,
well, but I mean, isn't the flip side of that the implication that because Obama was smooth and seemed to sympathize with migrants, that he got less scrutiny?
I think that it's fair to say that like liberals kind of
This is my
were
Marco
not
Rubio
paying
moment.
super careful.
Sorry.
And I wasn't paying super careful attention to some of this stuff because they sort of gave Obama the benefit of the doubt, assumed that he was trying his best. Although, come on, it was liberals who also sued him, right? It was the ACLU that, so it wasn't that kind of liberals said like...
There's a segment of the left that's been completely consistent on this.
Right.
But there's a larger group that, I mean, I guess I'd put it different, and maybe this is for David to weigh in. I think what Obama did, the stuff that's getting described as concentration camps, I think was totally understandable and a sort of hard but necessary response to this kind of cascade. And I think, Michelle, you seem to disagree, right?
Well, I don't believe it was. I don't believe it was necessary. I mean, partly because, well, for two different reasons. First of all, there are programs, and there was pilot programs during the end of the Obama administration that actually worked quite well. That said, either if you give people ankle bracelets, which is actually itself kind of an extreme solution, but if you give people ankle bracelets, or if you put them into various programs where they're sort of in close touch with lawyers and social workers, and then they will go to their hearings. They will, we're having a big discussion in this country right now about mass incarceration. And, there's a sort of generalized agreement on right and left that locking people up should be a last resort. And so it seems to me obvious, a corollary of that like locking families who haven't committed a crime up should also be a last resort. And there are other ways to do it besides taking these extreme measures. And then the other piece of this is that the whole reason that this process takes so long, right? So the part of the reason for this migrant surge and the reason that these kind of asylum claims overwhelm the system, right? It's because they take years. And so even though I think, most of these asylum claims are adjudicated, at least initially, most people pass their credible fear screening. So there is, most of them, I think, have some legitimacy, and I think about 20% of them are ruled to be genuine asylum cases. But let's say there are people who are sort of gaming the system, right? And saying, well, if you claim asylum, they're gonna let you go and you're gonna have years in the country while you go through that process. Well, that process doesn't have to take years, right? If you took some of that money that was spent like on the wall or the prisons or on all these other things and just hired and trained a ton more immigration judges, you could make this process go much more quickly and sort of both remove the incentive to make false asylum claims and remove the necessity of incarcerating people.
So before we leave this, let's just spend a couple minutes on what a better immigration policy would look like. So I've stipulated that I think Trump's is cruel and racist and odious. This is, in no way do I mean this as a defense of anything he's doing. I do worry that the Democratic Party no longer has a coherent policy on immigration. That Obama's, and it wasn't just Obama's, it was many Democrats, was coherent. It was path to citizenship, tight border security. I agree with you, Michelle, some of that was trying to win over Republicans, which totally failed, right? Every time Obama tried to do something to win over Republicans in Congress, it failed. But it also kept him popular and helped him win re-election, and so there were other benefits. And I think we now see the party moving to a place where they're essentially unwilling to talk about deporting anyone, which if you extend it means, hey, if you get here somehow into the country and you don't commit a violent crime, you get to stay. And you saw this in the debate with Hillary and Bernie. They were sort of unable to talk about this. And I actually worry that the Democratic Party is not really for open borders, but they're getting themselves into this place where they are not willing to talk about the fact that immigration restrictions help huge numbers of people in this country already, including a lot of people who are members of the Democratic constituency. That if we were to have less legal and illegal immigration in this country, it would help immigrants who've come in the last 20 and 30 years. And one of the reasons why immigration of the early 20th century was so successful was we then had a period with much less immigration. And I can already tell from your expression that I have not persuaded you.
Well, no, I mean, I kind of don't.
I'm sold.
I definitely,
sold.
I mean, right, like I'm not going to.
Beautiful, David.
You're saying like, why can't Democrats admit? I mean, I would say I don't think Democrats should stipulate that the country would benefit from much lower immigration flows. I mean, in part because the country's shrinking, or the country's not shrinking, but birth rates are declining. There are there are cities all over America that are emptying out. There are several states that have, negative population growth. And if you sort of want a young, vibrant country, you're going to get it through immigrants. I also just feel like immigrants are what this country is for. To me, it's like, what is? Right, if you love this country, you don't love it because, we have a lot of violence, we have a lot of inequality. There are so many things that this country does worse than basically every other Western developed country. But the thing that it does better, the thing that makes it great, is that we have been better at welcoming and absorbing immigrants. We're better at it than have historically been better at it than Europe, and it's kind of everything good about America flows from that, right? Innovation flows from that. If you look at the number of kind of immigrant Nobel Prize winners, immigrant founders of Fortune 500 companies, right? Everything good about this country flows from immigration policy, or flows from kind of being welcoming to immigrants. And so I think that doesn't mean that you can have open borders, but it does mean what?
Why not?
I don't know, for the same reason, Ross, you think that more Christianity in public life is good, right? But presumably you think that there are limits to that. You maybe think that
we're actually taping this, right?
Right. So to me to me, that if you say how many immigrants should we absorb, I would say as
Never
many
be too much Christianity.
as many as possible. But there are
so here's a different question.
Okay.
Yeah. But so the possible, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe you would agree that we should admit immigrants to the point at which immigration levels start to create major political destabilization. for instance. Would you agree with that?
Well, yeah, so to me, this is sort of the limit on immigration, is that there is this correlation. It's not exact, but there's this correlation between, demographic change and the rise of political reaction. And David Frum had this piece in The Atlantic, right, where he was basically saying, if liberals won't close the border, won't control the borders, fascists will.
I think that was actually the internet headline on that.
Right, and I don't totally buy that argument, because you also see, a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment in like Hungary, where they don't have a lot of immigrants. You see it in parts of this country where they don't have a lot of immigrants. So I don't think that there's a one-to-one correlation between increased immigration and increased kind of nativism and nationalism. But in as much as the two are interrelated, it's something that you have to think about. But just like the percentage of foreign-born population in the country right now, it's higher than it was in 1950, but it's not higher than it was in 1890, when like my shtetl grandparents.
But it will be, and I mean we're about to.
It won't be. Even by I should look at the numbers, but even by like 2027 at current rates, I think at current rates it'll take like another decade before it reaches, the highs of
of the turn of the last
previous highs, right? And so the idea that it's some sort of like unprecedented crisis, to me it doesn't seem that much different than previous freakouts over like the dirty Irish.
But isn't your thesis on most of our podcasts that the political situation in the U.S. right now is an unprecedented crisis, the likes of which we've never seen before? So the fact that this crisis has been obviously abetted by the man you think who's a fascist president's stance on immigration, doesn't that make you think that maybe this is that kind of moment where you want to say, okay, we've reached a point where we're empowering demagogues too much, and we want to take... I mean, I actually think David has now moved to my right on this. I mean, my view right now is that current immigration rates, the current level is probably okay, and we should change the skills mix a little to get more of Michelle's entrepreneurs and fewer low-wage workers. But that at the same time, you want to totally avoid the kind of situation, it's really hard to avoid, that you had in Europe that did contribute, I think, to Hungarian nationalism, where this sense of sort of basically an uncontrolled cascade.
Right, but
that
Hungary
the state
kept
is
the immigrants
powerless
out
to
and
stop.
still got the fascism.
No, but it got the fascism because the fascists were like, we're the ones building the wall, and the Germans are telling us to, if we don't build the wall, we're going to be like Angela Merkel.
Right, and my point is that I feel like Trump and a lot of Trumpism is a reaction to the inevitable demographic change of the country and the sort of fact that we have, this like youngest majority minority generation, and that's happening, immigrants or no. And that in the same way that I don't think less Jews would have been the solution to Nazism, I feel like immigrants are a scapegoat more than they're a cause.
Okay, but then I feel like you've sort of talked yourself back out of your limiting principle, right? Because then it's like, well, we can't limit immigration because then the Nazis win, right?
No, I don't think that that's right. I mean, I feel like that I think that these things are complicated and that there's obviously kind of a level of, okay, so I think that there's two different pieces here, because there's the migrant piece, like the piece of migrants from Central America, and the piece of immigrants from
general levels and policy.
Right, and so to me, the first piece, the migrant piece, is the more complicated one. The other one, right, I just feel like more. We need more students, more highly skilled doctors, more in general. The migrant piece is hard because, it's people who, like you said, are sort of, people resent having to, there is this, to me, the greatest tension is between the welfare state and the claims of like foreign-born people who need social services, right? I mean, and if you look at Europe, the countries that have traditionally the most robust welfare states also have pretty homogenous populations. And there's this real struggle to create a multi-ethnic social democracy. Kind of nobody's ever done it, and it's what I feel like the smartest and best people in this country are now trying to do. But, that becomes, I think, more difficult if you have an influx of, you're going to have an influx, but the larger that influx is, and the sort of more it strains the safety net, the more difficulty you're going to have, kind of getting people to buy into a more robust kind of social democracy. And so I think that
this has always been Bernie Sanders's implicit, maybe somewhat secret.
Right. And so I think that there's a genuine issue there. And I feel like, again, like I said, but you can solve that, or at least begin to solve it, without resorting to like really sadistic cruelty, in part just by having a huge scaling up of judges and people to adjudicate these asylum claims.
For the record, I'm not to your right on this issue, Ross. This is the rare issue in which you have nearly the correct
on the
opinion.
record, man. It's
okay, we are going to have to leave it there. This is the point when we were actually recording, when we would often go get a cup of coffee or something like that. But we will not do that to you all. We are going to move straight to segment B before we get to our audience interaction. And I'm going to read now the intro to segment B. Over the past few months, we've devoted episodes to a few of the top-tier Democratic presidential candidates: Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, who came on the show. We've also asked you, the larger you, our audience, to call us and leave us voicemails telling us which other candidates you have wanted us to talk about. And you have done so. So let's listen to some of your voicemails now.
Hi, my name is Owen Truesdell.
Good morning, this is John.
This is Kathy Martin.
Hello, this is Jennifer Haynes.
I'd like Amy Klobuchar to get a shot.
I'd love to hear more about Amy Klobuchar. Why do you think she's not doing better?
I want to request that Andrew Yang is on the show.
Andrew Yang.
Jay Inslee.
I would love for you to talk about Mayor Pete.
Mayor Pete.
Beto O'Rourke.
Cory Booker.
Tulsi Gabbard, please. Thanks.
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 Thank you.
Have a good one.
Thanks. Love the show. Bye.
Thank you.
We were careful to include that "love the show" just for ego gilding.
Ross, Michelle got the first word last time. You get the first word this time.
I mean, this field it's actually a problem for podcasting, right? That there are like 37 Democratic candidates, and people are like, "Why haven't you done the special Tim Ryan episode?"
Yes.
How many people here know who Tim Ryan is?
I'm going to interview
that's
Tim
not
Ryan
bad.
about yoga.
Oh, really?
Well, I'm planning. I hope to.
All right, it's an episode to come. So I'll say something about, it's Andrew Yang, right? That's how you pronounce, it's Yang, not Yang?
That sounds right.
It sounds right, okay. Yeah, that's the other thing, like Gabbard, Buttigieg, like these are some, it's almost like Douthat. These are some problematic last names.
The weirdest thing about Buttigieg, just to interrupt for a minute, which is he has the worst description of how to pronounce his own name. Has anyone else noticed this?
Edge.
He has this boot edge, which trips everyone else up, whereas there's an easy way to do this. It's Buttigieg.
Well, and what's even, so one of my wife's best friends, very strangely, is the daughter of Maltese immigrants, and her last name is Buttigieg. But my wife and their other best friend had always pronounced it Buttigieg, even though that is apparently not how it's actually pronounced. Mispronounced it, right. So I thought I was like ahead of the Mayor Pete curve, and then I had to be corrected about proper Maltese pronunciation.
Andrew Yang.
Andrew Yang. So the great Andrew Yang is basically, maybe we can have him on the show at some point. If he's listening, I would love to interview him and maybe argue with him about the universal basic income, which is one of his signature plans. And I don't think he's going to be the Democratic nominee, but he basically has like a 137-point platform that
He recently said the only thing standing between me and the presidency is popularity.
Right. No, I mean he's like, if one of us ran for president, I would hope we would be like, it's sort of like the pundit runs for president, or it's in this decadent republic of ours. He's figured out that eventually we're going to get a Caesar Augustus, right? The guy who just rewrites everything, who's like, you're marrying him and you're marrying her, and and he's got the list, and he's endorsed a lot of ideas I disagree with. He's had harsh words that he sort of had to walk back about circumcision, I think. We'll devote a segment to that later, don't worry. Maybe segment is the wrong word to use. But he's also, I think he's endorsed one of my favorite populist ideas of moving many cabinet agencies out of Washington, D.C. and scattering them around the heartland. Instead of bringing in more immigrants to save the heartland, we need to bring in more HHS bureaucrats. It's awesome. So I'm pro Yang.
Even though you're anti-universal basic income.
I am anti-universal basic income, but I'm pro the spirit of the Yang movement.
Which of these candidates most interest you?
Well, Mayor Pete definitely interests me because, I mean, first of all, just because he seems to have some of that sort of Obama energy around him, which is, I mean, because conservatives, at least a fair number of conservatives, seem to really like him without kind of liking anything that he's proposing. There's something about him that, you know, he's like, there's always this sort of one, like, fresh-faced young man that people get really excited about. And, you know, since I think a lot of Democrats just kind of want to see who takes off, you know, there's something there. And then I also think that when you really listen to him, he does have a real diagnosis of the kind of fundamental structural problems that have kind of led America to a crisis point, right? So he, you know, talks a lot about the sort of like the fundamental flaws in our kind of constitutional system, right? That have kind of led us to this point of minority rule, which is a big issue of mine. And so, you know, I think it's great that he's out there basically saying, you know, we kind of have to think about. He's like, you know, one of the things that he says sometimes is that we need to think about like how we can change the system, you know, not kind of for the next 4 years, but by the time I am Donald Trump's age, which is in like 40 years or something. You know, I also really, it kind of makes me sad that she's one of the minor candidates, but I really like Kirsten Gillibrand.
Our senator here in New York.
Our senator, who, you know, it's interesting. I mean, it's interesting that I think her campaign isn't taking off because the bet she has sort of made is that she can run as like the resistance candidate, right? I mean, her claim to fame is that she has voted against Trump more than any other senator. She is sort of trying to harness this women's outrage about, you know, both policies and just like the fundamental deep insult of having this man in the White House. And so, you know, I don't know that her campaign is going anywhere, but she speaks to me at least.
I realize this sort of the performative aspect of politics shouldn't matter, or at least people like us think it shouldn't. But I've been really struck listening to some of the extended interviews with Gillibrand, Booker, and Buttigieg, and how different I found them. They, to me, were giving speeches when they were being interviewed. And that some of the more personal aspects of politics, I think Gillibrand and Booker are both extremely impressive. And if they're listening, we'd like to have them on the podcast too. But when they do these sort of more intimate conversations, they often, to me, lapse a little bit into speeches. And one of the things that I've found impressive with Buttigieg, which is he seems extremely smart, and as you said, he has a good diagnosis, but he also seems human, and you can imagine him sitting next to you rather than just speaking from behind a podium. Some of that may be expectations, right? I have higher expectations for Booker and Gillibrand, but he's the first candidate who, after listening to him for a long time, I thought, wow, he exceeded my expectations.
I mean, I think, you know, I'm one of the conservatives who has enjoyed some of his shtick. I think his sort of, you know, I'm here to, you know, respect the heartland and talk about a culture war truce and all that kind of stuff. That is probably part of what I am hypothetically looking for in a Democratic nominee, and he is very personable. At the same time, like, well, and I think he's sort of kicking Beto O'Rourke's ass right now in certain ways, in terms of being like the white male, you know, middle of the country outsider who's burning up social media, which I'm very much a sell on Beto right now, but I mean that could be wrong. I would just say though, like, you know, it's a little absurd, right? I mean, I know we elected Donald Trump, so we can do anything, but Mayor Pete has, you know, he has like this sort of, I mean, he's been mayor of a small, you know, medium-sized city. Not a failed mayor, not a wildly successful mayor either. Other than that, he's had a very nice meritocratic career. I'm probably jealous because he, you know, went to Harvard and was my concentration, and that's what we call majors at Harvard, by the way. In case you're ever talking to a Harvard man and you want to sound with it, concentration. So I'm just jealous, but it's a little, it's just
Well,
a little, it's a little much.
The thing that drives me crazy, I mean, and this isn't just about him, it's about Beto and sort of all these young men, is just, I mean, like, you cannot imagine a woman, not even a mayor, I mean, you can't imagine, like, the sort of mayor of Chicago, running for president and being taken this seriously as,
I think
as
if AOC was a little older, she might be getting some attention. If she
we'll
was
see.
running
I mean,
for
I kind
president.
of feel like it's always if she was running. I remember when people said that about Elizabeth Warren, and look where we are. And so so there is something maddening about having this group of extremely accomplished female senators, and then all of these kind of Buttigieg, and then a bunch of congressmen being like, no, what you really need is me.
Right. So that's a good, actually, point to talk about Klobuchar for a minute. So, I mean, I'm saddened by the whole Klobuchar situation because I've written this. I think in many ways, on paper, she is the single best candidate, right? She is, she doesn't fight the culture war stuff that I do think turns off a substantial number of swing voters, but she doesn't have this sort of silly centrism on economics that affluent people think is where the country is, even though it's not. She talks about monopoly power. She strikes me as a really strong candidate. If you look at her results in Minnesota, they're really impressive. And even more, I do think the attention to the way she treats her staff is in part sexist, right?
So the reason I don't think that is just because I feel like I've been hearing those stories, and I feel like how you react to them kind of depends on the stories that you've heard and the rumors that you've heard. And, if you've sort of been hearing those rumors and hearing things that are worse, and then it was kind of like, oh, inevitably this was going to come out, and why did you think this wasn't going to come out? And so, people either react to them like, oh, is this all, or, oh, this is, there's a lot here. I don't understand. I think that you need somebody who excites you need someone who excites, not just, I don't just mean kind of hipsters in Brooklyn, but I don't know anyone who's excited about Amy Klobuchar. I mean, I feel like there's people who are like, okay, fine, she would be fine.
I have a friend who I think of as like my Midwestern female Democratic swing voter who lives in Minnesota and loves her.
But I just think
and loves her more because of the story.
I feel like whenever Democrats try to,
just saying,
it's like, God, those Minnesotans are vicious.
Oh yeah, well, Minnesota nice is all a facade,
right? It's all with seething rage underneath Minnesota nice. But I think that whenever Democrats try to sort of overthink this stuff and think who is the person who is going to appeal to this mythical swing voter? Oh, I know, we need a war hero like John Kerry. I like John Kerry, but this, as opposed to the man Obama who spoke to our hearts, right? I mean, and I just feel like the lesson has been that you need to kind of start with your own enthusiasm and work out.
I mean, you could argue it's not just Democrats, right? The last three presidents are an orange-skinned, yellow-haired reality TV star, a first-term senator named Barack Hussein Obama, and a guy who has the same exact name as the most recent failed one-term president.
Right, and then and kind of Republicans haven't had good luck with this approach either, right? Republicans well, McCain appeals to all sorts of people, or Mitt Romney isn't going to freak out swing voters, but I just feel like the lesson of recent American politics is that you need to excite your own people first.
Okay, but also, I mean, for Klobuchar's strategy, it's a little different from the senator from New York, right? That she just needs Biden to collapse, right? Her lane is I'm getting moderate to centrist Democrats, and I think if Biden collapses, she could totally have a moment. She just can't have it as long as he's sitting at 30% in the polls, because those are her voters.
I'm not sure she can have a moment even if that happens, because I do feel like, as Michelle's saying, I think in part presidential campaigns are about falling in love to some degree, and I think these stories...
You don't fall in love with her, she'll throw a binder at your head. I think those stories...
Makes it harder for voters to do.
I will say, from everything I've heard, Michelle is right, and it's not sexism, she may be a uniquely terrible Veep-level boss. 2, I don't think that's hurt her generally. I think if anything, that has been a thing that has maybe boosted her a little bit, because people don't think of it that way. They're just like, oh, she's tough on her staff. That's not so bad.
So that's a good transition to, let's end here. I want to argue that Cory Booker is the most underrated candidate right now because, and it goes, here's how it works.
Very bold.
So there is a huge lane for a Biden-type candidate, right? And by that, I don't necessarily mean someone old. I mean someone who appeals to the very large part of the Democratic constituency that you can easily understate its size if you spend your days reading New York Times comments. Not that any of us would ever spend our days reading New York Times comments. But that part of the party is large. There's more Democrats say they want the party to move to the center than say they want it to move to the left, which probably means there are a lot of people who are not closely following politics. If Joe Biden, forget even about the current thing, proves to be as poor at running for president the third time he has done it, as he was the second and first times, that is going to open up a lot of space for another candidate. And I think Kamala Harris could get that group, but she's not going for them. And I think Cory Booker of the remaining candidates is the most natural home for those voters.
I think that that's true. And I mean, you're right. And I mean, that's a huge block. And then, of course, like African Americans are, the heart of the Democratic Party. And so, Cory Booker has a lot to sell him, right? There's like a lot kind of on paper that and he's, a charismatic speaker and he makes people feel good and hopeful. And I think that's important. And this gets into some like tricky stuff that honestly, if we were in the podcast, I would be like, you could cut this later if you want. But I just don't know. I feel like if we're going to nominate a heterosexual man, we need to know we need like total transparency about his personal life. And so to me, like there's something about like a bachelor. Yeah, I feel like if we need like a total
to go there.
autopsy.
I'm gonna be. And
right?
we have Rosario Dawson waiting in the wings as our special guest.
And that speaks. You know what? Like to me, that's an argument for Cory Booker. I mean, it's too bad that you can't just separate them the way you can separate president and vice president, because I'm sure a lot of people would vote for First Lady Rosario Dawson.
And on that note, we will end segment B. Okay, we are now going to move to something we have not done before. We are doing it for the first time tonight, and I'm supposed to be quiet now, so Michelle can take over.
Okay, so the reason I am taking over hosting now is because I do not want to submit myself to all of your judgment, but these two are. And so we're going to play a game. Here's how it's going to go. There's a lot of topics in this bowl. They are each going to pick one, and they are going to have 1 minute each to convince you why their thing is better. And then I'm going to ask you to vote on who wins. Okay.
Fair enough.
Go ahead.
And then
And then we will have a special championship round, about which more later.
All right, you ready?
Yeah.
We're doing this together?
yeah.
We're gonna pick the same one? I guess not. This is gonna be. Okay. I can't. So I got a Momo. How many people? So when we made the list of these things, there was a question: how many people know what Momo is? Does someone not me want to explain what Momo is briefly?
Isn't Momo a very dangerous internet character that is convincing children across America to self-harm?
Yes.
Allegedly.
Yes. And Momo sort of looks like a 10-year-old source whom I consulted before the show explained this to me. Momo sort of looks like a cross between a drugged-out rocker and Voldemort and someone with buggy eyes, and it's just this horrible-looking character with bizarre cleavage. Thank God the 10-year-old did not use that word when describing the character to me.
Covered a lot of ground here.
So there you go.
Yeah.
But it's also not real.
But it's not real, allegedly, although I may disagree.
Yes.
But it's like an internet, it's like a panic.
It's like
parents are worried.
Slender Man, although then
Right.
Slender Man, a bunch of people killed someone over it.
Yes.
So.
We've just made you hipper by introducing you to Momo.
All right.
I have cancer-causing windmills.
Which is not, despite how you read it, a claim that cancer causes windmills.
It is not.
Okay.
Okay.
So, David, you
So, so we each have 60 seconds. Can someone tell me when my time starts?
I think it's
Oh.
We are, I think there's going to be a clock here, but I'm going to wait for a signal. While I'm waiting.
This is high stakes. Here we go.
Here we go.
Okay.
Cancer-causing windmills are great, and it's actually the thing I was rooting to get, because in this Earth Day is coming up, and in the climate issue of the magazine this weekend, I have a piece arguing how we can actually finally get a policy that works. Cancer-causing windmills, as you may have seen, is President Trump's claim that windmills cause cancer. Not just that windmills cause cancer, the noise from windmills cause cancer. Right? Not the things they spew off, but the noise from windmills causes cancer. This is a gift to us, to our children, to our grandchildren, to the future of the Earth. It is so ludicrous. It moves us out of the realm of the carbon tax and the cap and trade and all these horrifically complex policies that everyone in this room thinks are a great idea and everyone in America thinks suck. Okay? And it instead moves us into a realm of policy where people understand that the climate change denial side, one that Ross agrees with, by the way, is completely ridiculous, and that we need to solve climate change.
I mean, ready? Okay, so first of all, windmills obviously cause cancer. There are 17 peer-reviewed studies that prove this. They've all been suppressed by the deep state. And I'm really sorry that you're here right now spreading this kind of fake news, this kind of misinformation to Times readers and subscribers. What does our motto mean if not going where the evidence leads and discovering? I mean, why do you think, look, there's a conspiracy here, right? Rich people on Nantucket, not that any of you guys would ever go to Nantucket, but some people go to Nantucket and they object to windmills being built there. And the claim is that they object to them because they obstruct the view. But obviously that's bogus. Obviously there has to be a deeper truth. And only the rich, well-educated Illuminati of Nantucket know that they're protecting their kids from cancer. 1. 2, the internet is satanic. It's possessed by the devil. Everyone knows this. If you know, what is this screen? What is this blank screen that you stare at? If not, oh, I have a message. Hang on, sorry. If not an abyss, it's an opening. It's like a Ouija board. I didn't even get. Man.
okay. So who's it going to be? So David, who's it going to be? You guys? Okay. Ross. Yeah, I think David took it. I think David proceeds to our final round featuring a mystery guest. So before the mystery guest comes out, David, why don't you...
Oh, I'm going to now pick it.
Yeah, why don't you pick it?
My topic is Spindrift Seltzer.
And let's pick the one for our mystery guest.
The mystery guest's topic is Donald Trump's caddy.
Okay, so the mystery guest is going to be one of you. So who among you wants to come up here and argue with David about Donald Trump's caddy?
That Donald Trump's caddy is better
than Spindrift Seltzer. Someone's got to do it, so I don't have to.
Oh,
okay.
Isn't he friends with David?
Yeah.
I think I met him backstage, like, you know.
Oh, we have a volunteer.
Okay.
Ross, 3/4 of the audience went to either high school or college with me, which is...
1/4 is Michelle's immediate family. 3/4 are your high school classmates.
Okay, who do we have here? Hi.
So nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Tell us.
Hi. You can have it.
Okay, you're going to have mine.
Thank you. Lucky Mike. I mean, it lost. Maybe we should switch.
If I'd had more time, I had a lot more on Momo.
I'm sure.
Okay.
I was rooting for you.
What's
Now
your
you
name?
can avenge him.
I'm sorry, I'm Gina.
Okay.
Gina Davidovich.
Okay. So
Thank you for
David
coming.
is going to go first.
Okay, I'm going to go first.
Sure.
How many people have heard us talk about seltzer on the podcast here? Here you go in case you want to see.
Oh, yeah.
All kinds of information.
Donald
Okay.
Trump's caddy. Got it. Okay.
I'm seeing 0 seconds. 1 minute. Okay. So sugary beverages are pretty much the root of not all evil in this country, but a lot of evil in this country. They are completely empty calories. If you look at the research, if you eat a massive piece of cake, it at least causes you to eat less later. But if you drink a big soda, it actually doesn't cause you to eat any less later. So soda is pretty much evil. I used to be in favor of soda taxes to get rid of this. I'm still in favor of it. It's also one of those policies that people like me think are great and the rest of the country thinks are terrible. So soda taxes, which have been passed, are now being gotten rid of. So unfortunately, we need the market to deal with this. And the way to deal with this is through seltzer. It is the miracle beverage. It feels like a treat, but it has 0 calories. It is the greatest thing ever. And while us New Yorkers, in our purity, can just drink regular seltzer, in the rest of the country, Spindrift is like a gateway seltzer. So it's got a little bit of juice in it, but it's sort of like a seltzer. And that really makes Spindrift the key. Can we just get another hand a second for our guest here? This is unbelievably bold to do this. Thank you.
Thank you. So I am Jewish, so I'm genetically predisposed to absolutely love seltzer. So I absolutely can't say anything bad about seltzer because I think otherwise they're going to kick me out. But I am going to say something positive about Donald Trump's caddy, which is when we think about the amount of time that the president spends tweeting, thinking about things to tweet, and in general ruining our lives somewhat entertainingly, but in, having awful implications for the future of humanity and history. I think we can all agree on that. Donald Trump's caddy and his success is actually maybe the ticket that we have to ensuring that those things happen less. Because if you think about it proportionally, the amount of time that Donald Trump spends golfing, you gotta imagine that his caddy also has his phone. Think about how much power that man has. If he could figure out a way, maybe with the help of a Chinese spy with a lot of USB disks, to get into Donald Trump's phone, and you think about the future of America really is in the hands of Donald Trump's caddy. The more time he spends golfing, hopefully the less time he spends screwing shit up. Can I say shit? I don't know.
So we were going to do a voice vote to determine who won, but I think our guest won by acclamation.
That was fantastic. Okay, one of the things that we've learned is that one of the important things about arguing respectfully is when to learn to stop arguing. So you get the last word, Ross. Before we do the closing credits, I just want to thank all of you, not just for coming tonight, but for your support of the New York Times more broadly. We were talking earlier about local media and about national media. We are not perfect at the New York Times, certainly. We have our own journalistic and business challenges, but basically this is an extremely healthy institution right now, defying many predictions by many, many people, including the President of the United States, to the contrary. And the reason that is true is you all. It's the number of people who spend their hard-earned money and their valuable time interacting with our journalism. And it's just really hard for us to fully express how grateful we are for all that. And the best thing I can tell you is you're the ones who make possible the investigations of Harvey Weinstein. You're the ones who make possible the coverage of the Trump administration. All of that is because we have readers who make it possible for us not just to chase clicks, but to do journalism that we hope will live up to what you all expect when you give us your subscription money. So we just want to thank you not only for coming out, but for your support of the New York Times tonight. And that's our show. Thank you so much for everyone coming out to see us. This show was produced by Alex Laughlin and edited by Lacey Roberts for Transmitter Media. We had help from Phoebe Lett, Ian Prasad Philbrick, Winton Wong, and Tyson Evans, as well as all of you. Our executive producer is Greta Cohn. Our music is by Allison Leighton Brown. Thanks to the Time Center for hosting us. We will see you next week.